In the Kingdom of Noctareth, where shadows whisper ancient secrets and moonlight reveals truths best left hidden, the Dark Prince Valamont ruled from his castle of black stone, a fortress that pierced the fog-laden sky like a crown of thorns. For centuries, his name had been spoken in hushed tones, a being caught between the mortal realm and something far darker. Yet on this particular winter night, the most powerful creature in the kingdom found himself powerless, iron chains binding his wrists and ankles to the cold railroad tracks that cut through the outskirts of the lower city. The distant whistle of the midnight train echoed through the freezing air as Margaret, a widowed nanny barely scraping by, and her 9-year-old daughter Clara hurried home from the merchant's quarter. What they discovered would shatter everything they knew about monsters, mercy, and the price of courage in a kingdom built on fear. From which country are you watching? Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story from the Kingdom of Noctareth. Margaret pulled her threadbare shawl tighter against the biting wind as she and Clara walked the narrow path beside the train tracks. The girl clutched her mother's hand, her small fingers cold despite the worn gloves Margaret had mended a dozen times. They shouldn't have been out this late, but Lady Thornwick had kept Margaret working past midnight again, scrubbing floors while the nobleman's family slept in their warm beds. "Mama, look!" Clara's voice cut through the night, sharp with alarm. Margaret's heart seized as she followed her daughter's pointing finger. There, sprawled across the iron rails, was a figure, a man, his dark hair matted with blood, his fine black coat torn and muddied. Silver chains glinted in the moonlight, ancient symbols carved into the metal that even Margaret recognized as binding spells, the kind used to restrain creatures of the night. "We need to go," Margaret whispered, fear clawing at her throat. "Now, Clara." But Clara had already stepped closer, her young face pale but determined. "He's hurt, Mama. We can't just leave him." The man's eyes opened, crimson irises that seemed to glow in the darkness, confirming Margaret's worst suspicions. This was no ordinary nobleman. The sharp canines barely visible between his parted lips, the unnatural stillness of his chest, the very air around him that seemed to hum with restrained power. This was Prince Valamont himself, the Dark Prince of Noctareth. "Run!" he rasped, his voice like gravel and silk woven together. "The train. 3 minutes. Save yourselves." Margaret's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to protect Clara from the monster before them. The stories were endless. The Dark Prince who drank blood, who could kill with a glance, who'd ruled Noctareth for 200 years with an iron fist. The Council of Elders had declared him both protector and threat, a necessary evil that kept darker things at bay while inspiring terror in his own people. Yet here he was, chained and bleeding, left to die like a common criminal. "Mama, please." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. "We have to help him." The train whistle blew again, closer now. Margaret could feel the vibration beginning in the rails beneath her feet. She thought of all the times Lady Thornwick had treated her like dirt, how the nobles looked through servants as if they didn't exist, how her husband had died in the prince's silver mines while the wealthy grew fatter. She thought of the injustice that poisoned every corner of this kingdom. And then she thought of Clara, her beautiful daughter who still believed people could be good, who still saw humanity even in monsters. Margaret dropped to her knees beside the chains. "Clara, check his pockets for a key, quickly." The Dark Prince's eyes widened in genuine shock. "You're helping me?" "Shut up and stay still," Margaret snapped, her fingers working frantically at the enchanted locks. The metal burned her skin, protective magic searing her palms, but she didn't stop. Clara searched his coat with small, efficient hands, finally producing a silver key that pulsed with dark energy. "Found it!" Clara thrust the key toward her mother. The ground shook. The train's light appeared in the distance, cutting through the fog like a blade. Margaret's hands trembled as she fitted the key into the first lock. It wouldn't turn. "Backwards," Valamont gasped, The spell requires... Margaret reversed the key. The lock clicked open. She moved to the second chain binding his wrists, her burned palms screaming in protest. The train was 100 yards away now, its whistle deafening. "Mama!" Clara cried. The second lock opened. Margaret grabbed Valamont's arm, ice-cold and impossibly strong despite his weakened state, and pulled. Clara pushed from the other side. The Dark Prince rolled free of the tracks just as the train thundered past, its wind whipping Margaret's hair and nearly knocking Clara off her feet. They collapsed in a heap beside the rails, breathing hard. Valamont's crimson eyes fixed on Margaret with an intensity that should have terrified her. Instead, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Why?" Margaret met his gaze, her jaw set. "Because leaving someone to die makes us no better than the monsters who put you there." Subscribe and like for Chapter 2, where Margaret and Clara discover the conspiracy that nearly killed the Dark Prince, and become targets themselves. Valamont struggled to his feet, his supernatural strength clearly diminished. Blood, darker than human blood, seeped from wounds on his temple and side. Clara watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination that made Margaret's protective instincts flare. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Margaret said, surprised by her own words. Safe? She was talking about hiding the Dark Prince, the very being most of Noctareth feared. "No." Valamont's voice was stronger now, authority creeping back into his tone. "You need to hide. Whoever did this will know I survived. Anyone who helped me becomes a target." "Who did this to you?" Clara asked, her child's directness cutting through the tension. Valamont's expression darkened, and for a moment Margaret glimpsed the predator beneath the wounded prince. "My own counsel. Lord Ashford, specifically. He's been consolidating power for months, turning the noble families against me. Tonight, during the council meeting, they drugged my wine with nightshade extract, one of the few poisons that can weaken my kind." Margaret's mind reeled. Lord Ashford was Lady Thornwick's brother-in-law, a man she'd served wine to countless times at dinner parties. A man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. "They dragged me here themselves," Valamont continued, touching the wound on his head. "Ashford said the kingdom no longer needed a monster on the throne, that he'd convinced the people I'd gone mad, become a threat. The train would make it look like an accident, or a suicide." "But why?" Margaret found herself asking. "You've ruled for 2 centuries. The kingdom is changing," Valamont finished bitterly. "The old magic is fading. Human ambition grows bolder. Ashford believes he can control Noctareth without me, that he can negotiate with the darkness in the Shadowwood Forest, that he can maintain order through fear and military might alone." He laughed, a sound without humor. "He's a fool. The things I keep at bay don't negotiate. They hunger." Clara tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, someone's coming." Margaret heard it too. Footsteps. Multiple sets, approaching fast. Torchlight flickered through the fog. Voices carried on the wind. Ashford's aristocratic tone unmistakable. "Search the tracks. If he survived, he couldn't have gone far. And find that damned nanny. She's late returning to Thornwick Manor. She may have seen something." Margaret's blood turned to ice. They knew. They'd been watching. Valamont grabbed her arm with surprising gentleness. "There's an old maintenance tunnel 30 yards south. It leads to the Undercity. Take it and run. Forget you saw me." "And you?" Margaret challenged. "I'll lead them away. I'm weak, but I'm faster than them." His crimson eyes held hers. "You saved my life, Margaret. Let me save yours." "How do you know my name?" she whispered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know all my subjects, especially those who suffer most under my noble's cruelty." Clara suddenly spoke up, her voice clear and determined. "No, we all go together. The tunnel's big enough." "Child," Valamont began. "She's right," Margaret interrupted, making a decision that would change everything. You're wounded and poisoned. You'll leave a blood trail they can follow. We help each other, or we all get caught." The torches were closer now. Margaret could make out shadows moving through the fog. 6 men at least, maybe more. Valamont stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but stay close and stay quiet. The Undercity is not kind to the living." They ran south along the tracks, Clara between them. Margaret's heart hammered as they found the tunnel entrance, a rusted grate hidden behind dead brambles. Valamont wrenched it open with strength that seemed impossible for his injured state, and they slipped inside just as the searchers reached the spot where he'd been chained. The tunnel was pitch black and smelled of earth and decay. Clara gripped Margaret's hand so tightly it hurt, but it was Valamont who surprised her. The Dark Prince's hand found her other hand in the darkness, his cold fingers wrapping around hers with unexpected care. "This way," he murmured, and somehow his voice made the darkness less terrifying. "And Margaret?" "Yes? Thank you, both of you." In the blackness of the tunnel, with danger above and unknown horrors below, Margaret realized she'd just made an enemy of the most powerful lord in the kingdom, but she'd also gained something far more valuable. She'd gained the Dark Prince's trust. Like and subscribe. Chapter 3 reveals the secrets of the Undercity and a shocking prophecy about Clara's destiny. The tunnel descended deeper than Margaret had imagined possible, the air growing thick and strangely warm. Valamont moved with increasing certainty despite his wounds, his supernatural senses clearly guiding them through the absolute darkness. Clara hadn't made a sound of complaint, though Margaret could feel her daughter trembling. After what felt like an eternity, a dim phosphorescent glow began to illuminate the tunnel walls. Margaret gasped. The stone was covered in ancient symbols, the same binding magic she'd seen on Valamont's chains. But these were older, far older. They pulsed with a sickly green light that made her skin crawl. "We're beneath the original city," Valamont explained quietly. "Old Noctareth, built 1,000 years before my time. When I claimed the throne, I sealed these passages to protect what lies below." "Protect it from what?" Margaret asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "From curious humans, and to protect humans from it." The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and Margaret's breath caught in her throat. It was a city, an entire city of crumbling Gothic architecture, preserved in the earth like a tomb. Buildings with spires and archways stretched into the darkness, streets paved with stones that glowed faintly with that same eerie light. But what shocked Margaret most was that the city wasn't empty. Figures moved in the shadows, pale, thin creatures with elongated limbs and eyes that reflected the phosphorescence. They didn't approach, but Margaret could feel them watching, assessing. Clara pressed closer to her mother. "You're kind," Margaret whispered to Valamont. "No, older. Different." He guided them along a pathway that skirted the ruined city. "My kind are turned humans, changed by blood and magic. These are the fated, what remains of Noctareth's original inhabitants. They neither live nor die, sustained by the ancient magic that permeates these stones." One of the fated stepped into their path, a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her features sharp and angular, her hair white as bone. She wore robes that seemed woven from shadow itself. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if from a great distance. "The prince returns, wounded, betrayed by his own." Her hollow eyes shifted to Margaret and Clara. "And he brings the promised one." Margaret pulled Clara behind her protectively. "What are you talking about?" Valamont stiffened. "Seer Moriana, I didn't expect—" "The prophecy speaks true," the fated woman interrupted, her gaze fixed on Clara with unnerving intensity. "The child born of suffering, marked by mercy. She who will choose between shadow and light, between the old ways and the new. The bloodless heir who will either save the Dark Prince or destroy him." "That's enough," Valamont said sharply, moving between Clara and the seer. "The child is under my protection. She and her mother saved my life. That's all that matters." Moriana tilted her head, a gesture that reminded Margaret of a predatory bird. "Protection? From you, the same prince who couldn't protect himself from mortal treachery." She laughed, a sound like wind through dead trees. "Lord Ashford moves against you even now. He's convinced the council that you've kidnapped a servant woman and her child. The city guard searches every home, every street. By dawn, they'll offer a reward for your capture." Margaret's knees went weak. Everything she owned, her small rented room, her few possessions, all of it was back in the lower city. And now she and Clara were fugitives, blamed for crimes they didn't commit. "We have to clear our names," Margaret said desperately. "We have to tell the truth. Who would believe a nanny over a lord?" Valamont's voice was bitter. "Ashford has already won the narrative. You're either kidnappers working with me or victims I've enthralled. Either way, you're condemned." Clara spoke up suddenly, her young voice steady despite the fear Margaret knew she must be feeling. "Then we prove he's lying. We find evidence of his betrayal." Moriana's hollow eyes gleamed with something like approval. "The child sees clearly. Lord Ashford's conspiracy runs deep, but it has weaknesses. His co-conspirators fear exposure, his plans require secrecy, and he believes the Dark Prince dead, his greatest mistake." Valamont looked at Clara with newfound respect, then at Margaret. "I can't ask this of you. You've already risked too much." Margaret thought of her husband, dead in the mines because nobles valued profit over lives. She thought of Lady Thornwick's casual cruelty, of the countless times she'd been treated as less than human, simply because she was poor. She thought of Clara, brilliant and brave, who deserved better than a kingdom built on fear and injustice. "You're not asking," Margaret said firmly. "We're offering. Ashford made this personal when he decided to use us as scapegoats. We help you expose his conspiracy, and you help us get our lives back. Deal?" Valamont studied her for a long moment, and Margaret saw something shift in his crimson eyes. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. "Deal. But we do this my way. The council meets again in 2 nights. That's when Ashford will officially declare himself regent in my absence. We have until then to gather proof of his betrayal." "And where do we start?" Margaret asked. A dark smile crossed Valamont's face, revealing his fangs fully for the first time. It should have terrified her. Instead, Margaret found it oddly reassuring. "With the one thing Ashford fears most, the truth. And I know exactly where he's hidden it." Subscribe and like for chapters, where Margaret, Clara, and the Dark Prince infiltrate the castle, uncover a devastating conspiracy, and Clara must make an impossible choice. The journey back to the surface took hours, navigating through forgotten passages that Valamont alone remembered. By the time they emerged in an abandoned warehouse near the castle walls, dawn was breaking over Noctareth, painting the fog-shrouded kingdom in shades of blood and ash. Margaret peered through a crack in the warehouse door, her stomach dropping at what she saw. Wanted posters already covered the city walls, crude drawings of her and Clara, labeled as accomplices of the Dark Prince, with a reward of 500 silver marks. Guards patrolled the streets in groups, questioning anyone who moved through the lower city. "They're thorough," Valamont observed, looking over her shoulder. The rest and feeding, he'd reluctantly drunk from a rat in the tunnels, much to Clara's fascination and Margaret's queasiness, had restored some of his strength, though the nightshade poison still weakened him. Ashford wants to ensure no one questions his narrative. Clara sat cross-legged on a crate, studying a map Valamont had sketched in the dirt. If Lord Ashford is hiding evidence of the conspiracy, it would be in his private chambers in the East Wing, right? That's where the council lords keep their apartments when they stay at the castle. "Smart girl," Valamont said approvingly, But the east wing is the most heavily guarded section of the castle right now. Ashford has stationed his personal soldiers there, men loyal to him, not to the crown. "So we need a distraction," Margaret said, her mind working through the problem. Years of serving nobles had taught her how castles functioned, where servants could move unseen. The shift change happens at midday. For 15 minutes, the guard posts are chaotic. If we time it right, we'd still need to get past the outer walls, Valamont interrupted, which are now watched specifically for me. Margaret smiled grimly. They're watching for the Dark Prince, but they're not watching for Lady Thornwick's servants. I still have my uniform, and Clara could pass as a kitchen girl. We could walk right through the service entrance. Valamont stared at her. You want to disguise yourselves as the very servants Ashford claims I kidnapped. That's insane. That's exactly why it'll work, Margaret countered. Everyone's looking for fugitives in hiding. No one expects fugitives to walk through the front door. A slow smile spread across Valamont's face. You're either brilliantly clever or completely mad. Maybe both, Margaret admitted. But can you get inside without being seen? I've been entering and leaving my own castle unseen for 2 centuries. The real question is whether you can retrieve the evidence while I create the distraction. Clara stood up, her young face set with determination that made Margaret's heart ache with pride and fear. What kind of evidence are we looking for? Valamont crouched to her level, speaking to her with the seriousness he'd show an adult. Letters, ledgers, anything showing Ashford's plans to take the throne. But most importantly, he would have needed help from someone with knowledge of poisons and dark magic. That person's identity is the key. Find their name, and we can expose the entire conspiracy. Margaret pulled her nanny uniform from her bag, wrinkled but serviceable. Then we'd better get ready. We have 5 hours until shift change. The service entrance to Castle Valamont loomed before them, its iron gates manned by 2 bored-looking guards. Margaret smoothed her uniform, forcing her hands to stop shaking. Beside her, Clara carried a basket of laundry they'd borrowed from a washing line, playing her part perfectly. State your business, one guard demanded. Lady Thornwick's staff, Margaret said, injecting just the right amount of exhaustion into her voice. She sent word demanding her personal linens. Says the castle laundry isn't suitable for her delicate constitution. She rolled her eyes conspiratorially. As if we haven't got enough to worry about with the Dark Prince's disappearance. The guards exchanged glances. Haven't seen you before. Because her ladyship usually makes us wait at the outer gate like common merchants, Margaret snapped, letting her genuine frustration with Lady Thornwick color her words. But apparently today she needs her silk sheets immediately. Would you like to explain to her why they're delayed? The mention of Lady Thornwick, notorious for her temper, made both guards pale slightly. They waved Margaret and Clara through without further questions. They were in. Margaret's heart hammered as they navigated the familiar castle corridors. Servants rushed past them, too busy with their own tasks to question 2 more workers. The shift change was beginning, creating exactly the chaos Valamont had predicted. East Wing, Clara whispered, pointing toward a corridor Margaret had rarely entered. That was where the nobles lived, where servants like her were only summoned when needed. They slipped through a side passage, Clara's small size allowing her to scout ahead while Margaret kept watch. The East Wing was indeed heavily guarded, but the guards were focused outward, watching for threats entering, not servants already inside. Ashford's chambers were on the 3rd floor, behind an ornately carved door bearing his family crest, a serpent coiled around a sword. Margaret tried the handle. Locked. Clara produced a hairpin from her pocket, kneeling by the lock with practiced ease that made Margaret wonder when her daughter had learned to pick locks. Within seconds, the mechanism clicked open. Where did you... Margaret began. The orphanage, before you adopted me, Clara whispered matter-of-factly. Sometimes we needed to get into the pantry at night. They slipped inside Ashford's chambers, a lavish apartment filled with dark wood furniture and expensive tapestries. Margaret began searching the desk while Clara checked the bedroom. Papers, correspondence, financial records, all seemingly innocent. "Mama," Clara called softly from the bedroom. "I found something." Margaret hurried over. Clara had discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the wardrobe. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a collection of letters tied with black ribbon. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the journal. Ashford's handwriting filled the pages. Detailed plans to assassinate Valamont, forged documents blaming the Dark Prince for crimes against the kingdom, and seize control during the chaos. But it was the name signed on several letters that made Margaret's blood run cold. "Counselor Erebus," she breathed. "The court wizard. He's the one who provided the nightshade poison and the binding chains." Clara grabbed several letters as evidence. "We need to—" The door burst open. Lord Ashford stood in the entrance, flanked by 4 guards. His handsome face twisted with cold fury. "I knew you'd come," he said softly. "The moment the Dark Prince survived, I knew he'd send someone for evidence. I simply had to wait." His eyes fixed on the journal in Margaret's hands. "And how convenient. You found exactly what I wanted you to find." Don't miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button now and smash the like button. Margaret and Clara are trapped. And Chapter 5 reveals a shocking twist that changes everything about Lord Ashford's plan. Subscribe so you don't miss the jaw-dropping revelation. Margaret clutched the journal to her chest, her mind racing for escape routes. But Ashford had positioned his guards strategically, 2 blocking the door, 2 advancing into the room. Clara pressed against her mother's side, her face pale but defiant. "You made this too easy," Margaret said, realization dawning. "This evidence, you wanted us to find it." Ashford's smile was like a blade. "Perceptive. Yes, that journal is quite real, damning evidence of my conspiracy, which is why it will never leave this room, neither will you." He gestured to his guards. "Seize them. Make it look like they resisted arrest. The Dark Prince's accomplices, caught breaking into a counselor's chambers. Tragic, really." The guards advanced. Margaret shoved Clara behind her, knowing it was hopeless but refusing to surrender her daughter without a fight. She grabbed a silver candlestick from Ashford's desk, wielding it like a weapon. "Touching," Ashford sneered. "A mother's love. Pity it won't—" The window exploded inward in a shower of glass and wood. Valamont crashed into the room with supernatural speed, his coat billowing like wings. He moved like violence incarnate, faster than Margaret's eyes could follow. One guard flew across the room, slamming into the wall with bone-breaking force. Another crumpled as Valamont's fist connected with his jaw. "Run!" Valamont commanded, engaging the remaining 2 guards while Ashford stumbled backward in shock. But Margaret saw what Valamont couldn't, Ashford's hand moving to a hidden weapon at his belt, a crossbow loaded with a bolt that gleamed with the same sickly green light as the binding chains. A bolt designed to kill vampires. "Look out!" Margaret screamed. She threw the candlestick. It struck Ashford's arm just as he fired. The bolt went wide, embedding itself in the doorframe instead of Valamont's heart. The Dark Prince spun, his crimson eyes blazing with fury, and Ashford's confident expression crumbled into genuine fear. "You always were a coward," Valamont said coldly, advancing on the Lord. "Poison, chains, hired assassins. You lack the courage to face me directly." "Because you're a monster!" Ashford spat back, but his voice shook. "You've ruled this kingdom with fear for 2 centuries. The people deserve better than a blood-sucking parasite on the throne." "The people deserve better than you," Clara said suddenly, her young voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She stepped forward, still clutching the letters. "You don't care about them. You just want power." Ashford's eyes narrowed dangerously. "And what would a child know about—" "I know you raised taxes on the lower city by 40% last year," Clara interrupted, her words tumbling out with fierce intelligence. "I know you closed the free healing houses that served the poor. I know you own the mines where workers die because you won't pay for proper supports." She held up one of the letters. "It's all here. Every crime, every life you destroyed for profit." Margaret stared at her daughter in amazement. When had Clara learned to read financial documents? When had she been studying the kingdom's politics? Valamont took the letters from Clara's hands, scanning them quickly. His expression darkened with each page. "Erebus didn't just provide poison. He's been helping you embezzle from the royal treasury. Hundreds of thousands of silver marks, stolen from funds meant for infrastructure, healthcare, education. While you hoarded your wealth in that castle," Ashford shot back desperately, while I maintained the roads, funded the hospitals, kept the Shadowwood's darkness at bay," Valamont interrupted. "Every mark I collected in taxes went back into protecting this kingdom. But you stole from your own people and blamed me for their suffering." Footsteps thundered in the corridor. More guards approached, drawn by the sounds of fighting. "We need to leave," Margaret said urgently. "Now." But Valamont shook his head, his gaze fixed on Ashford with predatory intensity. "No more running. No more hiding in shadows while men like him destroy everything I've built." He raised his voice, projecting it through the castle with supernatural power. "Guards of Noctareth, members of the council, hear me now. I am Prince Valamont, and I have returned." The guards burst into the room, but these weren't Ashford's personal soldiers. These were castle guards, men who'd served the throne for years. They froze at the sight of their prince, alive and clearly wronged. Captain Thorn, commander of the castle guard, stepped forward. His weathered face showed shock, then growing understanding as he took in the scene. Ashford cornered. The scattered evidence, Margaret and Clara huddled protectively near the Dark Prince. "My lord," Thorn said slowly, "we were told you'd gone mad, that you'd kidnapped innocent servants." Valamont gestured to Margaret and Clara. "Does this woman look kidnapped? She saved my life when your precious Lord Ashford tried to murder me. She and her daughter risked everything to expose his conspiracy." "Lies!" Ashford shouted. "He's enthralled them. You can't trust anything." "Then explain these." Valamont thrust the letters at Captain Thorn. "Evidence of embezzlement, conspiracy with the court wizard, assassination plots, all in Ashford's own hand." Thorn read rapidly, his expression hardening. Other guards crowded around, reading over his shoulder. Margaret watched, understanding and fury spread through the group like wildfire. "Lord Ashford," Thorn said formally, his hand moving to his sword, "you are under arrest for high treason." Ashford's face went white, then red with rage. "You can't arrest a council lord. I have rights. I demand—" "You have the right to a trial," Valamont said coldly, "which is more mercy than you showed me. Take him to the dungeons." As guards moved to restrain Ashford, he lunged for Margaret with desperate fury. But Clara stepped between them, and something extraordinary happened. The air around the child seemed to shimmer, and Ashford stumbled backward as if striking an invisible wall. Everyone froze. Clara looked at her own hands in shock, a faint silver light fading from her palms. Moriana's words echoed in Margaret's memory. The child born of suffering, marked by mercy. The bloodless heir. Valamont stared at Clara with a mixture of awe and recognition. "The prophecy," he whispered. "It's already begun. Subscribe right now and smash that like button." Chapter 6 is the epic finale where Clara's mysterious power is revealed, justice is served, and Margaret must make an impossible choice about her daughter's destiny. Don't miss the ending. Subscribe. The council chamber of Castle Valamont had never been so crowded. Every noble family, every guild master, every citizen who could fit into the grand hall packed the galleries to witness Lord Ashford's trial. Margaret stood near the front, Clara's hand firmly in hers. both of them dressed in simple but clean clothes provided by the castle staff. They were no longer fugitives. They were witnesses, and more importantly, heroes. Valamont sat upon his throne for the first time in 3 days, his presence commanding despite the lingering weakness from the poison. Captain Thorn had discovered Councillor Erebus attempting to flee the kingdom that morning, along with 3 other council members complicit in the conspiracy. All now awaited judgment. Lord Ashford, Valamont's voice echoed through the chamber. You stand accused of high treason, attempted regicide, embezzlement, and conspiracy to overthrow the crown. The evidence against you is overwhelming. How do you plead? Ashford stood in chains, regular iron, not the enchanted silver that had bound Valamont. His expensive clothes were rumpled, his aristocratic bearing shattered, but his eyes still burned with defiant hatred. I plead guilty to trying to free Noctareth from a monster's rule, he spat. You're a vampire, Valamont, an abomination. You've held this kingdom in thrall for 200 years, and someone had to steal from the poor? Clara's voice cut through the hall, clear and unafraid. She stepped forward despite Margaret's restraining hand. Someone had to close the healing houses. Someone had to let minors die. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret tried to pull Clara back, but Valamont gestured for the child to continue. I've read your financial records, Clara said, addressing not just Ashford but the entire assembly. Every document, every transaction. You didn't steal to help the kingdom. You stole to build a mansion in the southern provinces. You stole to buy a fleet of ships for private trade. You stole because you're greedy. She's a child, Ashford protested. She doesn't understand. I understand that my mother worked 16-hour days for Lady Thornwick and could barely afford bread, Clara interrupted, her voice strengthening. I understand that my father died in mines you owned because you refused to pay for safety measures. I understand that you blamed the Dark Prince for suffering you caused. The crowd erupted in shouts, some supporting Clara, others demanding order. Valamont raised his hand, and silence fell instantly. The child speaks truth, he said. And she has more courage than any lord in this chamber. His crimson gaze swept over the assembled nobles. For 2 centuries I've ruled Noctareth. I am a vampire, this is true. I drink blood to survive, though never from those who don't offer willingly. I am stronger, faster, and longer lived than any human. These things make me different, but they don't make me a tyrant. He stood, descending from the throne to walk among the crowd. I've protected this kingdom from threats you can't imagine. The darkness in the Shadowwood Forest, the ancient things that hunger for human souls, the magical catastrophes that could devastate our cities. I've held them at bay while you slept safely in your beds. And yes, I've collected taxes to fund this protection. But I've also built roads, established hospitals, created schools. Valamont stopped before Ashford. While you stole from the treasury I worked to fill, while you blamed me for hardships you inflicted, while you convinced good people that their suffering was my fault rather than your greed. I was trying to save them from you, Ashford screamed, his composure finally breaking. You're a monster. You'll always be a monster. Perhaps, Valamont said quietly, but I'm a monster who keeps his word. A monster who protects rather than exploits. What does that make you, Ashford? A human who acts more monstrously than any creature I've ever known? The question hung in the air. Margaret saw nobles shifting uncomfortably, recognizing their own reflections in Ashford's crimes. How many had looked the other way while servants suffered? How many had prioritized profit over people? The council will vote, Valamont declared. All in favor of exile for Lord Ashford and his co-conspirators, stripped of titles, lands, and wealth, sent beyond our borders to survive or perish by their own merits. Raise your hands. Every hand rose. Even those who'd privately sympathized with Ashford couldn't defend him now, not with the evidence so clear, not with the crowd watching so intently. So be it. Valamont gestured to the guards. Remove them from my sight. As Ashford was dragged away, he locked eyes with Margaret one final time. You saved a monster, he hissed. When he finally turns on you, remember that you could have let him die. Margaret met his gaze steadily. I saved someone who needed help. If that makes me foolish, then I'll be foolish. But I'd rather be a foolish woman with a clear conscience than a powerful man with blood on his hands. Later that evening, Margaret and Clara sat in a comfortable apartment within the castle, a reward Valamont had insisted upon despite Margaret's protests. Real beds, warm blankets, food that wasn't stale bread, and thin soup. It felt like a dream. A knock came at the door. Valamont entered. Looking more human now, dressed in simpler clothes without his princely regalia. He carried a leather-bound book under one arm. May I? He asked. Margaret nodded, and he sat across from them, his ancient eyes studying Clara with renewed interest. The power you displayed in Ashford's chambers, he began carefully. That was defensive magic of a type I haven't seen in centuries. Moriana called you the bloodless heir. I need to understand what that means. Clara looked at her mother, then back to Valamont. I don't know what I did. It just happened. Valamont opened the book, a tome of prophecies, Margaret realized. There's an old legend, a child born of suffering but untouched by bitterness, a child who chooses mercy over vengeance. Such a child can bridge the gap between human and supernatural, wielding power that belongs to neither world, but draws from both. He looked at Clara intensely. The prophecy says this child can either save the Dark Prince or destroy him. It all depends on choice. What choice? Margaret asked, protective instincts flaring. Whether to embrace the power or reject it. Whether to use it for protection or control. Whether to become a guardian of balance between humans and creatures like me, or to choose one side over the other. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. I don't want to destroy anyone, not even Lord Ashford. I just wanted people to see the truth. And they did, Valamont said gently. Because of you. Your courage, your clarity, your refusal to let injustice pass unchallenged. That's more powerful than any magic. But the power is real? Margaret pressed. This prophecy? Yes, and it will grow as Clara grows. Eventually, she'll need training to control it. Valamont closed the book. I can offer her that training. Not to make her a weapon, but to help her use this gift safely. She could become a bridge between our worlds, helping humans understand creatures like me aren't inherently evil, and helping creatures like me remember the value of human compassion. Margaret looked at her daughter, this brilliant, brave child who'd already accomplished so much. What do you want, Clara? Clara thought carefully. I want to learn. I want to help people, and she looked at Valamont shyly. I think the Dark Prince needs help too. Everyone's so scared of him, but he's not that scary once you get to know him. Valamont laughed, a genuine sound of joy Margaret hadn't heard from him before. Not that scary? I'll have to work on my reputation. Maybe that's the point, Margaret said softly. Maybe it's time for Noctareth to see their prince differently, not as a monster to be feared, but as a ruler to be respected. Clara could help with that. We both could. Valamont met her eyes, and Margaret saw hope there. Hope she suspected the Dark Prince hadn't felt in a very long time. You'd stay? Even knowing what I am? You're not what frightens me, Margaret said honestly. Men like Ashford, who abuse power and exploit the vulnerable, those are the real monsters. You may drink blood, Your Highness, but you've shown more humanity than most humans I've known. Clara yawned, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Valamont stood, preparing to leave, but paused at the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing me. Not the monster or the prince, but me. Margaret smiled. Thank you for giving a poor nanny and her daughter a chance to matter. You always mattered, Valamont replied. I just needed reminding of that truth. After he left, Margaret tucked Clara into bed, stroking her daughter's hair as the child drifted toward sleep. Mama, Clara murmured, did we really save the kingdom? We helped, Margaret whispered. But I think the kingdom will be saving itself, one truth at a time. Clara smiled and slept. Outside the window, Noctareth sparkled under moonlight. A kingdom still shadowed and imperfect, but with hope now flickering in the darkness. A kingdom where a poor nanny and her daughter had proven that courage and compassion mattered more than wealth or titles. A kingdom where even the Dark Prince could find redemption, if someone was brave enough to offer it. And in the years that followed, that's exactly what happened. Clara grew into her power under Valamont's guidance, becoming a legendary mediator between humans and supernatural beings. Margaret became the king's advisor on matters affecting common folk, ensuring their voices reached the throne. And Valamont himself, inspired by their courage, slowly transformed Noctareth into something unprecedented. A kingdom where monsters and humans worked together, where justice outweighed fear, and where mercy was seen not as weakness, but as the greatest strength of all. The train tracks where a prince almost died became a monument, not to suffering, but to the moment everything changed. The moment a poor nanny and her daughter proved that saving someone's life, no matter who they are, is always the right choice. And that sometimes, the scariest monsters wear human faces, while the greatest heroes can be found in the most unexpected places. The end. If you loved this story, subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. We create dark fantasy stories from the Kingdom of Noctareth every week, and your support helps us bring more epic tales to life. Share this video with friends who love gothic fantasy, and drop a comment telling us what you thought of Clara's journey. Which Noctareth story should we tell next? Subscribe now, and join our community of dark fantasy lovers.